And sick wife, man, for your mother-in-law that's moved in with us.
Good evening, everyone.
She's not really
I'd like to welcome everyone to something that we've not done before, so you're getting to see it the first time. We're making this up as we go along. But I thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Charlie Harper. I'm the editor of PeachPundit.com. We're a Georgia political-based website, and we, for the last almost 9 years now, have been trying to work around political issues that affect Georgia and Georgians. And we've mostly done that predominantly on the web. We've had a few public meetings before where we've gone out to various restaurants and just met socially. But this is an issue that we seem to be mired in gridlock conversation where we haven't been able to break through on a problem that, as we're seeing on the news every night right now, is serious and real, and we want to treat it as such. And so while we try to approach issues on our page with a bit of a sense of humor sometimes and a bit of lightheartedness, this is something that's a little bit different tonight. So we're actually sitting here in a little bit more of a formal setting, out in public, and we're going to have a conversation with 4 folks and myself about the very real issue of immigration reform and what might be done to start addressing it as the problem that it is instead of the political football that provides great sound bites from people on all sides, but an absolute reluctance to do, frankly, anything on addressing the issue while it clearly is getting worse on a daily basis. And so with that, as I said, I've got 4 folks on the panel, and they are Mr. Jorge Fernandez of the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. He is their Vice President of Global Commerce, and he's going to talk a bit about the challenges that are faced from the business community from maintaining the status quo where it just frankly is not working for folks on all sides. We have Ms. Maria Cortes. She's a certified port interpreter for the Doraville Municipal Court. She's worked in various levels of state agencies as a customer interface that gets to see on a daily basis how this problem is affecting the services that we're trying to deliver and have to deliver because the problem has not been solved. We have DeKalb County Commissioner Elaine. She's going to talk from a similar angle, but much more of the person that actually has to deal with how to appropriate local tax dollars because the federal government has really abandoned its responsibility to deal with this problem. And then we have Mr. Will Kremer. He is the chairman of the Georgia Association of College Republicans. Will is going to talk about this, frankly, from the political side, because while a lot of us are very familiar with the rhetoric that gets used around this issue, frankly, I know in my experience of working with young Republicans and college Republicans, they hear the rhetoric very differently. And he's going to deal with that specifically, not just from how it hits the college Republicans, but frankly how it hits different segments of the voting population and how we're really setting ourselves up, if you're a Republican, for failure in the future because of damage we're doing based on the rhetoric today. And that's something we've got to figure out how to message that there needs to be a problem solved while not turning off potential voters and existing voters while solving said problem. And so with that, I'm just going to address something very much right up front. I've seen some emails and some other social media saying that you had a meeting of the pro-amnesty open borders crowd tonight. I've asked everyone up here individually, and I'm going to ask them to nod in front of you so we don't have to make everyone stop to talk and put on different mics. But amnesty, and the definition of amnesty is to give a blanket pardon with no consequences. There is no one up here that is for amnesty, period. So before, whatever you hear tonight, you can start with that. We're not here to talk about amnesty. We're also not here to talk about opening the borders and allowing anyone that wants to come in access anytime, any way they want, without documentation. That is not the solution that we're talking about. If that's what you came to hear tonight, you did not hear the right thing. So that is not what we are talking about. We are talking about how we get back to a system that, frankly, we have an administration that has chosen to essentially ignore the law and defer it, and how we get back where everyone is living within legal status, within a documented status, so that the system works and is respected. That's generally what we are here to talk about tonight. So I wanted to make that clear. And with that, I'm going to let everyone up here take a few minutes to kind of talk very specifically from how their experience in their daily life is affected by this problem and some of the issues they see that as we work towards understanding, everyone is here tonight because we want to see some sort of solution. We truly believe the status quo is not working and is not acceptable, and that doing nothing is not an acceptable solution to this problem. that we have to figure out how to get back to where we need to be. So with that, I'm going to let Mr. Fernandez start and kind of talk about what he sees and the challenges from the business community.
Yep.
Let me just tell you a little bit so we can connect the dots on who we are and what we do. The Metro Atlanta Chamber covers all 29 counties of the metro area. It's about 6 million people. And our main focus is to grow the economy through job creation. And there are 3 ways of doing that. One is the recruitment of companies to come here and create jobs. Second is to help Atlanta-based companies grow on markets, particularly international markets. We also connect the universities to research, both in the United States with companies and overseas. And what we do from the international perspective is that recruitment of foreign companies. And what it means is that for every 10 companies that come to Georgia, 40% of those are foreign companies. And these companies come here to create jobs here. They have to bring executives with them. And the way the current laws are is a hindrance to recruiting those companies, and because of the quota systems for the H-1B visas that every company has to abide with. The other part that we hear constantly is the fact that the universities are training bright minds coming in here. In fact, education of foreign students is one of Georgia's top exports, if you will. And those students come here, they get trained, but they can stay here because they cannot be hired. They don't have the visas by Georgia companies or even foreign companies that are here. And by the way, foreign companies that are here create Georgian position. It's a job created here. And it is a challenge for these universities and for us, for that matter, for each one in this room, the fact that we're putting the smartest and the brightest mind, and we have to let them go. So it is an issue of a brain drain that we're having, and we need to address this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Well, I'm an immigrant myself. I was born in Cuba, and my family took about 8 years for us to make it to the United States. We had a sponsor. My father had to cut sugarcane with criminals as penitence to leave Cuba. So we value the liberties, we value the freedom and the opportunity, and we love the United States of America. With that being said, I have for the last 14 years worked as a Spanish interpreter in both DeKalb DFACS, the court systems, and also social programs with kids with disabilities and such. And everyone that I interpret for, about 98% are undocumented parents whose children have been born in the United States. They don't have a lot of income. They don't have the legal status. Their children are receiving Medicaid, food stamps. They're in the public school systems. And the social services but the parents and these children are living under awful situations. And a blind eye is given to this. The victims are the children. And there's just a huge problem. On the other side, I've also interpreted at the school systems. Many of these children that are brought very young, that are in our school systems, end up getting involved in gangs, end up having problems. They have learning disabilities. Their parents are not able, many of them have second-grade education because they're undocumented. They're scared of everything, and the kids get involved in really bad situations. We are seeing a lot of sex trafficking and drug abuse, and the gangs growing to such a number. It's almost like you have 2 public schools within the same school. You have the regular kids, and then you have all these kids. And these kids eventually will end up on the streets. And then we go to my last interpreting position in the court system, where You have people that are stopped for a red light and they do not have a driver's license, and it happens once and it happens twice, and then on the fourth time, it's a felony now because of the law that was passed a few summers back. And once that happens, that case will then be transferred to the state court of DeKalb County, and many of them are in DeKalb County Jail or Gwinnett County Jail, and the taxpayers are paying for this. When I tell them, you cannot drive, you do not have a Georgia license, it just doesn't register. So at the state level, it is my personal opinion from my work that I've done in the community, because of the lack of enforcement at the federal level, immigration laws, protection of the borders, we have to know who's coming in and out. I'm a U.S. citizen now, this is my home. I've lived in Europe, and I came from a communist country. I don't know of any country in the world that lets you come in and out without knowing who you are. I still to travel to a country that doesn't ask me for my passport. We need to know who's coming in. We need to know, we need to protect the children. They're being trafficked and they're being abused. And at a federal level, nothing's being done. And the states, the municipalities, the cities, the counties are expected to fix this, and it's impossible. And that's my personal opinion.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to, I think, get back to that issue of children coming in, because that is what we're seeing on the news every day. So given you've had experience with that, both as a child, immigrant to the country, as well as that's what you're working with every day, I have a feeling that's going to be quite topical. Commissioner Boyer, you've heard kind of the services that Chief Scrubs you worked with every day that cost the taxpayers money. You get to allocate that money. Tell us how that works.
It was a perfect segue, and we didn't even organize that discussion. But coming from DeKalb County government, I've served in the government role as a commissioner for 22 years now. And in 2007, when these laws were passed, we, the county government, are told we now have to start implementing. So we had to start going and putting on seminars and trying to train our personnel on how to report. And the reporting is in several fashions, and one of the ones that I spoke with the departments about in preparation for this was what departments would be receiving or offering public benefit. So number one would be personnel. Obviously you're going to be hiring, so you have to check the E-Verify. You have to make sure that whomever you hire, if they're going to receive a public pension or insurance, that they meet the criteria of the E-Verify and the safe communities. Then I spoke with the police department and asked how they handle it. Well, the police department in DeKalb says we pick up people when we feel the crime has been committed. They are then transported to the jail, where the jail is in fact the enforcer of immigration. And in DeKalb County Jail, and speaking with our sheriff, whatever the crime, whatever the charge is, they are then either bonded out or they're held. And once they're fingerprinted and that they are put into the system that goes through the FBI and then into Homeland Security, and at that point Homeland Security calls DeKalb County Jail and says, we want you to place an ICE hold for 2 days and allow us to come and detain whomever it is. So in speaking with the sheriff, that's how we handle it. The other department that is impacted is Parks and Recreation. And how that is impacted is we are given a lot of pass-through grants from the state. For instance, vouchers and summer programs, after-school programs. We, if we're passing on those vouchers, have to verify that whomever receives those vouchers is in fact a legal resident of the country. Now, the one issue that we came about was with the new board that has been formed, and that was recent. We were a pass-through for a grant, and the issue from the newly formed board was, did in fact we verify the charity workers that they were legal? So before we could even give the vouchers to that charity, now we have to verify that the charity has all documented workers. So the long and the short of it for county government, as it is passed down to the property owners, is the more staff we have to hire, and the more regulations and reporting that we have to do by federal mandates, it's the trickle-down effect. We are the ones that are then the enforcers. And as you all know, all government is local, and the feds and the state just continue to pass down to us. So those are some examples of how we in county government have been put this onus on us to try to verify, and it's really the federal government, in my opinion, that needs to fix the system and not put all of the onus on local government.
Thank you, Commissioner. And with that, we've had 3 people talk about the various problem as it actually exists, and so then we're going to look to Chairman Kremer to put a bit of a political spin to that, because to fix the problem, it's a political solution. And while, again, we try to do what we can do at the state level, it ultimately is a federal government issue to solve. And currently, we're looking at the House of Representatives, which is Republican-controlled, to what that solution is going to be. The Senate has come up with their version. It's not very well liked in the House, so the Republicans have to decide on the message. So, how do we get a message and a problem solved through the House that addresses the problem that ultimately, possibly, can be at least implemented through, if not this Senate, perhaps the one that will take office next January. But how do we do that without upsetting the legal immigrants that can vote at this point, and those that otherwise, again, as a generational thing, I think you shared with me before, you can tell the audience, it's not just immigrants that are turned off by the rhetoric. So take any of that you want, run with it.
Well, as Charlie said, my name is Will Kremer. I'm the state chairman for the Georgia Association of College Republicans, which is comprised of thousands of college students who are Republicans. Our main goal is to recruit the next generation of Republican leaders and to make sure that millennials return to voting Republican. What a millennial is, the generally accepted definition is someone born between the years of 1982 and 1999, give or take a few years depending on who you're speaking to. So what we do is we college Republicans go on campus and we talk to people. We talk to our classmates, our roommates, our friends, whomever it is. And whenever we talk to them and we run into a Democrat, which happens more often than I'd like, we ask them, why are you a Democrat? We get a plethora of answers. It can range from anything from I support Obamacare to I support gay marriage. And a lot of young people are single issue voters. So, but there are a few reoccurring themes whenever you talk to a millennial. They are, the Republican Party is the party of no. We never offer solutions, we just say no. The second thing is that we lack compassion. We hate people, we hate women, we hate minorities, we hate the gays, just throw in whatever you want, and Republicans hate them, of course. And the last part is that we aren't diverse. How do we recruit young Hispanics, young African Americans into our party when they're not represented? That's the big issue with millennial voters. And so when it comes to immigration, and you talk to a young person about that issue, they have a completely different perspective than anyone who would be sitting on this panel, because we don't see them as these invaders coming into America to destroy our country. We see them as our friend that we had art class with in elementary school. We see him as our friend that used to come over to our house and play GameCube, whatever console you want to throw in there. We see him as our friend that we graduated high school with. That's how we view them. We don't view them as these monsters. We don't view them as people coming to suck off of government programs. So whenever you're addressing the immigration issue and a young person sees that, and we see you screaming and hollering that they're evil people, that doesn't register well with us. We don't see that in a constructive way. We want a solution. We don't want we don't want them sucking off of government programs. But at the same time, you have to understand who you're talking to with your audience. And as the people that work to recruit the next generation of Republican leaders, we need to make sure that our party is welcoming to them. And it's, with some of the rhetoric going on, it's certainly not welcoming to young Hispanics. So I hope to offer some political insight into that and how my millennial can understands the immigration issue.
Well, thank you all for for laying out the case. I think we can start with what Will's talking about, work our way back into some of the other issues. But you know, we're in Gwinnett County, which the makeup of Gwinnett County is changing. Really, you were telling me a story that you told a little bit to the audience about coming here as an immigrant. You work through the legal process. Some of the rhetoric that we're using when we talk about this problem, how does that sit with those of you that came here legally and done everything right? How does the current political environment affect you as a voter that tends to vote on the GOP side?
I would say to the Cuban community that immigrated in the 60s, just crossing over is not acceptable. Within the Cuban community, there are two sets of immigrants. I have met people who have gotten on a boat and they said, I'll die in the ocean, but I'm not going to stay in Cuba anymore. 8 months pregnant. I met a woman 8 months pregnant. She got on a raft. I can't imagine that. I think that the United States has always been successful because people from different cultures and different countries have come here for centuries and have blended into a whole new nation, bringing in their positives and becoming one. And I think we're losing this with the way we are approaching immigration and the way we have been approaching immigration for the past about 50 years. You have to educate the people. Why are you coming to the United States? What is it that the United States can offer you as a citizen of Honduras or Colombia or China? Or you have to know why you do things, and you have to know why you're coming. There's a price you pay. For us Cubans, we left our country, we left our family. My father never saw his parents again. There were many years where we couldn't even call them. Letters took 6 months to get there. There was a lot of personal loss. For us, coming to the United States was freedom, and we valued that freedom. You have to know why you immigrate to a different country. It's a whole new culture. It's a lot of things. And I think for Americans born in America, you have to remember that at some point, unless you're a Native American, your family immigrated as well. So, but I think where we're losing it, where we're losing the new generation of immigrants is we're not really teaching them what it means to be an American citizen. And we're kind of acting like, oh, well, you're not really here because you don't have papers. I think it would be good for America to utilize a much better system of immigration. You know who's coming in, you can educate, you can utilize companies from abroad, they can utilize the students that are already here, and so on and so forth. And actually, I had a question for Mr. Fernandez in reference to, I've had a lot of folks tell me that their work visas were denied. And they're transient workers, they've been coming here for years, and yet they were denied. And it's happened during this administration. And I don't understand that when we have farmers in South Georgia whose crops are rotting. And no one here that is trained to do that kind of work. It's hard labor. And we have farmers from other countries who are willing to come for 3 or 6 months out of the year and do the work and know how to do it well, and yet we're paying at the supermarket.
Well, for disclosure, you're stuck with 2 Cubans here today. I'm very similar. Similar story. I came here by myself with my sister. My parents were united a year later. And lo and behold, I'm a retired, of course, became U.S. citizen. I'm a retired U.S. Air Force pilot that served for 20 years. And then I went on to the private sector. And so both Maria and I represent what immigrants should be. But the root of the problem that we're discussing here today goes back to your question too. It's your point of why we're here to have this discussion. Every time we talk the word immigrant or immigration reform, it always gravitates towards negative. we never have a discussion because we can never get there because of the rhetoric that goes out there when of the possible of workforce development. I'll give you an example that a couple of people that are in this room helped us from the chamber on driver's license and how that ties on to the immigrations and foreigners. For a foreigner, for an expat that is here, let's say from Siemens, their visa, their work visa, it's given for X number of years. The Georgia driver's license it's titled to the visa. So the problem was that there was a disconnect when those visa renewal had to be made. The driver's license expired. They couldn't drive. These are executives with the whole family. I had a case of 6 families from Samsung that the entire family had to go back to Korea because they could not get the Georgia's driver's license. So Senator Ronnie Chance, who's here, helped us to bridge that gap in order to find a solution. But it was very difficult to get that passed because when we talked about the driver's license, when we talked about foreigners, when we talked about immigrants, the rhetoric took us away from the facts. And it took us more of an effort to get away from the rhetoric than to discuss what is possible. So one of our biggest challenge for recruiting is precisely what we're talking about. So that's the purpose of immigration reform. It's from our perspective, is how do we address workforce issues? How do we address being able to keep the best and the smartest to learn, to work, and to invest in the United States, just like you're saying. But that discussion has to happen. It is a federal issue. The state don't have it. And so unless we have the dialogue in Washington about what immigration reforms, we're not going to get there. And we've got to get all the filters out.
Well, one of the, to kind of piggyback on that, at lunch today, I was having lunch with an executive from a Fortune 500 company, I think a Fortune 50 company, and one of her frustrations when this topic came up is the number of folks, and you mentioned it in your intro, that we have in this country that we educate in our university system, especially for our high-tech jobs. They rely very heavily on engineers, and we train them, and then this company that spends a lot of money supporting higher education and spends a lot of money on folks that they may have co-opting during that program to work. They cannot get them a visa to hire them. And so they go back to their home countries and ultimately end up working for one of her major competitors. And so there's a frustration that when you go back to the workforce development, that we're not, we're spending the money currently under the system that we have to educate at a very high level people that are getting skills that are very much in demand, and we can't figure out how to keep them in this country after we've already put the expense on the expense side of the ledger. We can't turn them into taxpayers, even on visa level, not even on citizenship level, but just on a visa level.
Yeah.
And clearly, when you're talking about an engineering grad, I think Will could probably vouch, he's seen these. As a poli-sci major, he keeps being told by his engineering brethren that the starting salary is very high just for an undergrad. If you're looking at a graduate engineer, and you can't get a work visa in this country, they can be a really good taxpayer. So that's one frustration that I've kind of seen. Will, do you have any other anecdote? You talked about, as you said, that you see this growing up, but from a college level standpoint, is there anything else you can add to that?
Well, I mean, coming from a college point of view, I think y'all hit the nail around the head. I mean, there's no way to keep them here. We're lagging behind, and I mean, it's such a high in-demand job, and it's a difficult program on top of it too. So I mean, they're the best and the brightest, and we're not managing to keep them here in the United States. I mean, it's college students everywhere are. I mean, all the engineer students, they're feeling. I mean, and it's easier to maybe go back home than stay here and try to get a visa that they can obtain.
Right. And keep in mind that for our region, we're 52% of our economy service oriented, and that what I mean by service, that's engineering, that's architects, those are the lawyers and so forth. So the demand, it's there, and that's where our research universities are producing, and that is valuable minds that not only the universities it's losing, but the companies are losing because they're going back to the country, and we not able to advance. And keep in mind that if we look at the lagging in terms of jobs for the 21st century, which goes back to what we're talking about. You're talking about jobs in STEM, the science and technology, are key. Those are the type of jobs of the 21st century, which we're talking about the Elaine that can bring those assets, and we can keep those assets so we can continue to grow and compete, not only with foreign countries, but even with other cities in the United States.
I might have a little different perspective, and I agree with what you all are saying, but I come from working with inside county government for 22 years, and so my experience has been that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing most of the time, and I think you're talking about some very good policy issues. Part of what I think would be the brokenness of getting things organized is the fact that it takes someone 11 years to gain citizenship, and I'll talk from a personal perspective. I have a daughter who's at UGA who had a sorority sister, had a visa from Canada. It took them 11 years. Her father was a white-collar engineer, and it took them 11 years to finally get their citizenship. So I know from working in county government that you have different departments that don't speak to each other. And so the brokenness of trying to fix that actually, to me, would overweigh even some of these policy decisions, because if you can't get the process to work correctly and you don't have people speaking to each other, I can tell you from a personal experience in my 22 years, if I don't stay on something constantly, it doesn't happen. And it's not that the government workers are not doing their job, but they're not taught to interface on the lower levels, like the department heads. And so a lot of what we're seeing is just not getting work production done at a quicker and faster rate, and maybe streamlining the process.
And I think that's kind of a little bit of a segue into the first part of at least most solutions and most lines in the sand I see come from the GOP side. Will correct me perhaps if I'm a little off on that, but it's a secure the border. And how that ties in to what Commissioner Boyer is saying is, frankly, I know one of Senator Isaacson's main positions is biometric visas are a requirement at this point, because depending on whose estimates you believe, 40 to 50% of the current folks that are here that are undocumented came here legally and are on an expired visa. And so securing the border is something that I know from talking to my friends in DC that are actively working on this and are various levels of skepticism. But how you determine a border is secure it sounds easy, but if we're envisioning that somehow there's a wall that's going to run all the way from Texas to the Pacific Ocean, that's nice. And I see memes on Facebook all the time that show a picture of the southern border of Mexico, and yet with this current problem of minors coming into the country, 93% of the minors are estimated to be from El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala. So ask me how secure that wall makes the southern border of Mexico before we look at spending tens of billions of dollars to necessarily think a wall is all that it's going to take to be secure. You may want a wall, you may not. I'm not telling you that that's right or wrong. I'm saying that if 40% of the people come in via airports or through legal visas, I don't think a wall necessarily solves the problem in and of itself. So I think we've got to look around it again. I think there's a visa problem, and you, I think, alluded to the same thing. If we don't have a system that works to document who is here, then saying we're going to document everyone really kind of misses the mark from a policy perspective, because all we've done is we've got a nice bumper sticker slogan that in practical reality means nothing.
Well, completely. I mean, there's no point in really having an immigration reform discussion until you can secure the border. I mean, you have to secure the border in order for any solution to work, but the problem is securing the border. A little backstory, I grew up in Texas. I'm born and raised Texan. I'm very proud of it. You can ask anyone who knows me. I talk about it all the time, including Whataburger. And it's a big part of me. But anyways, if people are coming here legally through visas and there's no way to track them, I mean, I believe she mentioned it earlier that we're the only country that lets people in and doesn't know who they are and where they're at. I mean, there's a huge issue with tracking people and knowing where they are once they come in here legally. So, I mean, and I know that we all agreed on it. There's no real solution until you can secure the border. So, and a lot of millennials, I might add, support securing the border in a serious way, not just building a wall, but a serious crackdown on the border.
Yeah, securing the border is a metaphor. I mean, it's not a physical. We haven't even talked about the Canadian border that is as porous as the southern border. And people get to Canada, and from Canada to here, it's amazing. Even from a terrorist perspective, the trains that come through, so securing the border is a lot more than just wall. And so the visa situation, and again, it goes back to comprehensive immigration reform, so we can talk about the whole aspect of this, not just piecemeal this thing. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
50 years ago, I think the United States has had a good immigration policy. I think it's been fair. I think it's not perfect. No government is perfect. But I think that in the past, if you look at U.S. history, they've welcomed people from war-torn countries like Vietnam. Because of all the history with Cuba, there was a way to get here legally. And people were willing to wait and pay the price and do it legally. And we did that, my family did that, and it was a high price to pay, but it was worth the freedom that we received when we came to the United States. I think that somewhere after Vietnam, in the late 70s and so on, and now we're here, that people just don't have a way to come here legally. And it doesn't matter if they're graduates of Georgia Tech, MIT, Texas A&M with PhDs and have come to the United States legally and have been here legally and they abide the law and they have something to give to the country. It's not working anymore. It's almost as if the Department of Immigration is sabotaging our system purposely. You cannot, if you were born in a slum somewhere in another country and your own government thought nothing of you, you don't think about laws. You think about how you're going to eat the next day. And you say to yourself, if I die trying to get to the United States, then I die. But I'm going to leave this place. So that's the human perspective. And one of the most wonderful things about the United States is that it's always had an open heart and looks at the human aspect of the situation. This is atrocious what is happening with these children. They are being trafficked. I mean, they're human. They're being put into the sex trade industry at an enormous rate. We cannot turn our heads. At the same time, we need to clean up this immigration situation. If the people know in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador that they can go to the U.S. Embassy, apply for their work visa as a transient worker, come here, work the season of strawberries, blueberries, whatever, if that's what they do, or they can come and be a gardener for 6 months, they will go back to their country and they will come back the next season. And you will know who's coming in and out of this country. You will know who's coming in. They will value the United States of America and the opportunity that, and the United States has this workforce that will build our economy. And it will work once again. It will.
And there's, when I was in the military, I had the opportunity to work on an immigration crisis of Cubans in the 80s. No, I'm sorry, it was in the 90s when the immigrants were just crossing into Guantanamo, and it created a huge humanitarian situation, very similar to what's happening, what's happening now. But because it came to such a level of humanitarian, things cleared out in the sense in Washington. And we were able to move forward and to create an immigration agreement with a country that we don't even have diplomatic relations with, and we made it happen. But again, it goes back to the original point. This can only happen if in Washington across the aisle, we can have a civil discussion about the solution. And pointing fingers and coming up with slogans and insulting people is not going to happen. It happened over and over and over. And there are certain situations today that didn't happen before, when the Soviet Union collapsed, so therefore anybody that was coming from a communist country, they have preferential status. That's no longer the case. So what we have right now are basically economic immigrants, and in a world of instant communications, the word gets out very, very, very quickly. But again, we have to open up our minds and bring it back to address the issue from a comprehensive perspective, which I think is what you're trying to say at university, and address it, and the purpose of what we want to discuss today.
And I'll throw out one of the hurdles to having that conversation across the aisle is a lack of trust. And the only other time I've been in this room, I was asked at the last minute to moderate a panel for another group on a T-Splus campaign from a couple of years ago, when we tried to pass a 1 penny sales tax for transportation. And what we heard over and over again was a lack of trust in the system. And those that I think are the most reluctant to engage in an honest dialogue on this process don't believe, because the current administration is picking and choosing which laws they wish to enforce, and they're kind of writing things as they go. And there's a 2011 memo I know that is largely being credited as one of the reasons why the residents of these 3 Central American countries have decided to send their kids here, because we basically have a non-enforcement status right now that pretty much says their kids can stay. How do we get that trust back in the system? I'm not sure anyone up here, frankly, is qualified to answer that question, but I think it has to be asked, because before we could really get, I think, those from, especially on the GOP side of the aisle, that just don't believe that we're going to enforce the laws the next time we rewrite the laws. Anyone got any suggestions on some baby steps that start to establish trust of what we can do next?
I mean, just again, I go back to having served in government so long as having the process that exists on paper work. And I don't know that that's happening. And I don't know that our legislators pay attention to that side, because they're trying to, that's what legislators do, is create policy. But if we actually had enforcement of the laws that are on the books and actually looked at how the process of putting people forward through their visas and tracking them, as we were talking about earlier, I don't think that's being done. Just from personal experiences of talking with people who are trying to get into this country legally. It shouldn't take, 11, 12, 15 years to do that if there's a process that's outlined and you're moving forward to it. So I wish, not only from the legislative side, I wish they would put more emphasis on the administrative side. I think that is really a huge problem, and I see it daily.
Yeah, and also the tools to make it do it. I'm not an expert in this, but I understand that the current law, when a child crosses the border illegally, before they sent back, just because of the slave trade and all that, there's got to be a hearing to make sure of what the situation is. My understanding is that there's a 2-year backlog in terms of the courts, because there are not enough judges, there are not enough tools like you're talking about. So even if it was in the law right now, there are not enough tools to make it happen. Of course, you have to get the federal level, it cannot be local, and so it's a very complicated issue.
Well, how do you even trust the federal government to execute immigration reform effectively whenever we have an administration that changes the signature healthcare law that passed 17 times through executive order? I mean, you can't trust them to properly go about immigration reform passed by the House and the Senate if they're just going to change it at a will whenever it's convenient. So, I mean, there's a huge deficit of trust there, and I'm unsure if any sort of real immigration reform can even go through with under this administration.
Well, I guess understanding that challenge, and that does make it tough. At the end of the day, I think we all, again, we've said the problem's broken, or the system's broken. We know there need to be, again, you're saying more tools, and frankly, in a lot of ways, that means more appropriation, it means more funding, because we don't have enough people to actually figure out who's here, document who's here in the system. That's going to cost money. There's a proposal before Congress right now coming from the executive branch to do that. Commissioner Boyer clearly is talking about how the fact that even the policy we have is not necessarily workable, because while we passed many different patchworks of laws, and then there have been various administrative procedural rulings from within the executive branch, it's still, and I can say from my own experience as someone who a lot of my friends know I'm in politics, whatever that means, probably more than half the requests I get where someone needs help are dealing with INS issues. It's amazing how many people have to touch that agency and how long those problems go on, and how many files are just flat lost and people have to start over. And so that's not unique to INS by any stretch, but I can say that right now even what we have doesn't work. And so figuring out how to even make what we have work on the way with forms is the first part of it. But I'm curious, in the little bit of time we have left, kind of the way this got started was I wrote a column, I guess now 3 weeks ago, where I talked about moving away from the term amnesty and starting to get to the concept of probation, that there's not a blanket pardon given to the people that are here, but even back during the last presidential cycle, most of the nominees for Republicans for president acknowledged we're not going to deport 11 or 12 million people. That we, those that have only come here in the last year or two possibly have to go back. We're not going to break up families and so on. We've got to figure out how to deal with the people that are here. So if you accept that premise, I don't know that all of you do, and please feel free to disagree, but with a little bit of time we have left, I mean, is there a concept of probation that works where folks acknowledge, possibly pay a fine, have to get documented, go through a probatory period before they even get in the back of the line to go look after citizenship? Anyone have any comments on something like that in terms of just changing the dialogue like that help the situation, or are we frankly still at a point where we've got to have what we have at work before we even have that conversation?
I mean, I think we have to have that conversation, and I will agree with Will, because my girls are millennials, and they have friends that are undocumented, and they do have them in art class or whatever group they've been in, and you aren't going to break up families. So there has to be options and discussions given on how we take the 11 or 12 million people and figure out a solution. I personally don't think that you're going to be able to deport those folks. I just don't see how that can happen. Government can't do anything of that magnitude. I can assure you, we can't even barely pick up the trash correctly on Mondays and Fridays. So I guarantee you, we can't deport 12 million people. So I think there needs to be discussion, and as Charlie said from the get-go, we believe the borders need to be secured. I absolutely agree with that. There shouldn't be a blanket amnesty. I agree with that. Now, what's some solutions in between? I believe if they would come forward, actually some of the community, and we all know they're in our community, so we can't pretend they're not. If they felt there was a way to come forward, I believe the majority of them would be good legal citizens. Now, how long that path takes, surely it doesn't take 15 years. But surely there's a way that we can get them in a system where they are documented, we know where they are, and we would really find out. I think they themselves would turn over those criminals elements, if you would, because they don't want them in their community either. But they're not going to tell you where they are until they feel like there's a way to protect themselves and their family. So I think we have to open the discussion that way. I'm not an expert. I can just tell you, though, from local level, government is not the answer. It needs to be coming from the community up. Because anytime government controls anything, they mess it up.
You're right. Coming back from the community, the fear factor is there. Because people don't know how they're going to turn in issues like that. But the dialogue has to happen. And go back to the trust issue. It is what it is. And it's the best we got right now. And ignoring the problem, it's not going to solve it. It's not going to solve it. The political discourse will determine which way it's going to go, but in the meantime, that discussion needs to happen, both from the humanitarian side that we're talking about and from the comprehensive immigration reform to address all the aspects, from the business side, which is what I see from what I said, and this is all from the illegal migration of people, and we're not even talking citizenship, we're just talking visas. Right, start from the basis, and then in between there you have residency. Doesn't have to be citizenship. So there are many paths, but the dialogue needs to happen.
One of the things that I have found in representation is it's really not the elected officials that need to come up with the solutions, it's the community that needs to come up with the solutions. And if the community as a whole, and as a Republican, a long-time Republican, offer solutions, give people options to think about, let people have the opportunity to mull things over, you'd be surprised what people can come up with. And not necessarily from the top down, that doesn't necessarily work. But if you can get the community to agree on, for instance, as you were just saying, residency, how long that would take, I think there could be workable solutions, and I think we have to start beginning this. I appreciate, Charlie, you opening with having these discussions, and if we could do this around the community, around the state, I think folks out here could have really good ideas to help put us on that track.
I don't understand why immigration has become this thing we can't touch. They work for us, I think. We pay their salaries, and therefore stop penalizing the folks that are here to work, that are here to study. I think work visas are a great idea. I don't think that people should renew their work visas every 2 years at a cost of $2,000, because I have a friend from Honduras who came legally, and every 2 years he has to pay about $2,000. And this past renewal, they took almost a year to renew the visa, and then he's up for renewal in a year. They are penalizing the folks who are doing things legally and encouraging illegal. And the criminals have all kinds of...
I would rephrase what you just said. We're incentivizing people to come here illegally because of the cost of the visa, $2,000, and you only get a year out of the two. It's easier to avoid the system right now than to work with it. That's kind of what I just heard.
That's what I see a lot. That's what I see a lot. The folks who do it correctly don't get the results they should.
Well, it is a huge issue for corporations that have all the resources and the money to pay for the process. It's not just only the money, but it's also the complexity of the process. To renew a visa is a monumental, yeah, and then in the meantime, your driver license expires, so there's a whole slew of things. And if you're here as an expat, yeah, the company will pay you to go back to your country until you resolve the issue. But if you are like the Honduran lady, what is she going to do? Then what happens is the end result is she violates the visa extra.
And also in court, we've had people come that are here for 3 months, and they cannot drive with their licenses from Mexico, and they have a visa and they have a passport, but the local police department says if you're here after 30 days, the Georgia law says you have to have a Georgia driver's license. And they're like, but we can't get a Georgia driver's license because we don't have a permanent residency status. We're here by such and such company to do such and such project, and we live in Mexico or wherever they're coming from. The federal government has to work with the state government, who has to work with the local government, because we are one country. The United States is one country. So the federal law cannot stamp out the state laws and vice versa. And if we give people the opportunity to be able to get a work visa or a study visa legally, then you know who's coming in and out.
And just to point out how ridiculous the system is, if you come here as a tourist and you want to rent a car, there's a couple of rental car agencies that, being an immigrant or somebody that is from outside the U.S. is such a four-letter word, that they're having difficulties to rent a car. And we have had executives who have come here to study the market, to open a business here, who have called and created a scandal at the airport because they cannot even rent a car because the travel agency, the rental agency of the car is interpreting the law their own way, because if it's an immigration and driver's license, they don't want to touch it. So they take their own. So it's creating a huge problem in terms of the image that we're giving to the outside world in terms of recruitment of jobs.
And it's hurting the United States.
Of course.
It's hurting our economy, and it's hurting our future. We are in a global economy. What happens in the Middle East is affecting my pocket. You wake up one day, Gas is $3.57, the next day it's $3.80. What happened? Turn on the news. You're gonna know what happened. All right? We have to think a little bit, we have to be smarter about things. If I'm a farmer in South Georgia, and I only need employees who are good at farming, why can't I get Jose from Guatemala that I know that has worked for me in the past, get his visa approved, I'm his sponsor, I'm responsible for him while he's here working in my farm, and when he's finished, he goes back home. In the meantime, he pays his taxes because he has a valid Social Security number, and for those 6 months he's here, before he leaves, I make sure he pays his taxes, and he helps me. We know who's coming in now. I keep bringing that up.
Well, I think that's, at the end of the day, that's where the trust, knowing who's here is what a secure border means. I think that's what we've got to all agree.
It's not a wall.
And that's, we've got to get to that point. And so I think that's the one thing as a starting point to move forward. We know that's what we've got to do. And there's a lot more work and frankly a lot more talk before we get to the work. So we've got about 2 minutes left. I said I'd have everybody out of here at 8 o'clock. So any last words of anything anyone wants to say that they haven't gotten off their chest, please feel free to have a closing remark.
I'd like to close with something. I mentioned it early on whenever I was kind of introducing myself, but you know, whenever you're discussing these issues, it's very important to communicate it in the right way. And it's important to cater your message to your target audience. If you're talking to a young person about immigration reform, calling, and I only say this because I've heard it more than 10 times, y'all. Calling immigrants invaders, using words like that, you're not winning any arguments when you're talking to a young crowd like that. And that doesn't just go for young people, that goes for women, it goes for minorities, it goes for Hispanics. Whomever you're talking to, it's very important to cater your message, because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we can govern. And how do you govern? You have to have power to govern. So if you are completely destroying any chance of getting to power to govern, then you're all talk, and you're not being effective with your ideas, and you're not implementing your ideas. So I just wanted to end on that note. That's important to not destroy any sort of support you can get from your own party to actually implement your ideas.
Messaging matters.
Messaging does matter.
Well, again, I first thank all of you for willing to have the discussion. Like I say, it's the first time we've done this. We'll get the feedback and see how we do it again. But I do think it's part of a discussion that we need to have, that there has to be something constructive, frankly, coming from the center and the right of center, that there is an alternative, that just saying no is not an option. Hopefully we at least laid out our thoughts on that today. And I thank all of y'all for coming to hear. And so for those of you that would like to continue the conversation, we're going to be at La Consuela, which is at 179 West Brogan Street in Lawrenceville. I'm told it's about 3 miles from here.
No.
So we're going 4 miles.
Half a mile.
I've never been there.
Half a mile.
I thank John Richards from PeachPundit for working the camera and getting the facilities arranged for us, and the rest of you that kind of helped. And again, for y'all spending your night with us and being up here on the stage, and those of you that took an hour or so out of your time to come and listen, we appreciate it. And hopefully, maybe you didn't hear exactly what you expected, but we do appreciate it. So with that, we are going to stand adjourned. We're going to move over to La Consuela and hope to see and chat with y'all there.
Is that going to be an open discussion?